Hi, my name is Dorian, and this is You, Me, and the Industry, a show where we talk about all aspects of video games and the people behind them. This episode, we're getting technical, and what better guest to have than the one and only John Linneman. He produces incredible videos and articles about the technical aspects of video games. In my opinion, his work is among the best in the industry, and I am happy I got the chance to interview him. We talk about his job at Digital Foundry, get into console wars, we get some behind the scenes information on some of his coolest projects, and we go into why Death Stranding looks like a PlayStation 2 game. Here we go. Hello everyone, welcome to the show. Today I'm joined by the tech specialist like none other. Here with me today is the human fraps himself, the one and only John Linneman. John is a writer for Eurogamer and Digital Foundry. Over there he creates articles and videos where he digs deeper into the technical aspects of video games. Likely, if you ever check online for a graphics comparison or a performance comparison of a video game, it's likely that it comes from Digital Foundry, and these days it's also very likely that John had something to do with it. John, welcome to the show.
Oh, well, thank you. That's quite an introduction, but
I try.
Yes, absolutely. That is us. We are all about graphics, technical stuff. Both new and old. So
yeah, and you basically are killing it these days, like everything with the big game releases and next gen stuff. I don't know, like to me you really just like your output has been stellar over the last years.
Yeah, thanks. I mean, it has been extremely busy, you're right. And it's interesting because we're kind of winding down for this generation, so you'd think that there'd be less on that side, but there's still cool stuff coming out. There's also the classic stuff to look at, and then of course all the news for next gen stuff has been slowly, making its way to our ears. So, it's getting exciting, and despite everything going on, this past month or so has been really good for us. So, I'm grateful that people enjoy it and are watching.
And basically, how are you doing these days?
Oh, just staying busy. It's nonstop work, man. I'll tell you. Lots of weekends, lots of late nights, but that's how it goes in the world of content creation.
That's true, yeah. It's also, I guess, a sort of a thing where you can cope with it, with all the situation going on currently in the world.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, we're all kind of remote work. That's how it's been for years, actually. Like every one of us is based in our own place. Everything I do out of my house, and it works great. I'm not sure I could do the kind of stuff I'm doing as easily from an office, because I don't think many offices would tolerate the sheer amount of gear that's set up at any one point that allows me to get what I need.
Yeah, totally. So with Yumi and the industry, what I basically would like to do is offer the guests the chance to bring a topic to the show. So John, do you have something for us? Is there something on your mind these days besides being busy and doing all these great tech videos we all know you for?
Well, one of the things that I've gotten back into over the last year or so, or I guess 9 months, is like classic PC gaming.
Mm-hmm.
So I've jumped back into I've had plenty of CRTs around for years, but I've gotten into CRTs and like actual like old school computer games, building up old rigs, and I've been collecting lots of old hardware from that era, which has proven to be rather addictive in a weird way that I don't really feel today. You know what I mean? If you have a whole drawer full of AMD and NVIDIA graphics cards, they're all going to do the same thing. They may do it a little bit faster, but everything's going to kind of look the same. Where you go back to these old, in the 90s, for instance, you could have like 15 graphics cards and they all look so different in terms of what you get. And it's stuff that I'd read about for years, and it's really nice to finally be able to, actually see it for myself. And also things like audio, getting into different sound cards. I've picked up all the different Sound Blaster variations and other company third-party things, and, the Roland sound modules, and just going through all of that on my own has been a lot of fun. So
yeah, and kind of makes you really appreciative of what they basically did back in the day with all the stuff they developed.
Yeah, absolutely. It's, development was really different back then. Everybody kind of had to fend for themselves. They're building their own games from the ground up, and you get some very different feeling titles, But I guess the other thing that kind of surprises me is going back to like, the Pentium 3 era and running Windows 98 is how fast Windows 98 is. Like if you're running applications designed for that generation, it's kind of faster than a lot of PCs you might be using today, just in terms of the impression, the general experience, like the time to click on things and how long it takes for things to open. It feels so responsive in a way that kind of surprised me.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that sounds awesome. Yeah, and maybe I should probably dig deeper into these kinds of things since I'm kind of a noob when it comes to knowledge in the tech area of PC and console. I always really appreciate the stuff you do because you basically break it down very digestible and very understandable for even a person like me to understand it with your examples. But so I'm not really aware of these differences of how they did it back then. But I think I would agree that it feels like that the games back then felt very different in how they looked and how they basically functioned. Because it has kind of streamlined, I would say, with the globalization or almost with game development. Nowadays, it feels kind of like, well, you can still feel the cultural differences of how they are approached by the content of the game. But for the tech area, they almost feel like very similar, right?
Yeah, absolutely. We've kind of lost some of that uniqueness that there used to be, I could say, which is not bad. The idea is that developers want you to experience their game the way they want you to experience it. So having all sorts of crazy variations doesn't necessarily fit the mold.
And do you kind of wish that there would still be these kinds of two versions of a game? For example, like Aladdin was on Genesis and Super Nintendo. Would you still wish like that would be so interesting to have like a totally well, not totally, but a like vastly different game on Xbox and compared to PS4?
I mean, I don't know about that. Like that's just, I think that's cool. I would appreciate it, but just realistically knowing what we know about game development, like that's insane. Like that it makes zero financial sense to do that. Yeah. And just the amount of work and people required to do a modern game is so different compared to what it used to be. Like there's no reason to do things in that way. I mean, and that's why, I did find older hardware so interesting, is because everything had its own unique limitations and you couldn't just transplant what you were doing in one space directly to another. And that's why you would end up with such unique variations of games in different teams, because they weren't the same. And I think that's super cool, but we're just beyond that, really.
So, and maybe after we tackle this topic here, we can dig into maybe something how you started off in the industry, and
sure.
So just a very, very basic and broad question. So basically, how have you become interested in this specialization on the tech side of video games, and how did you discover your passion for the retro games as well?
Oh man, I guess I've always been interested in like tech aspects of things and how games work, and I did IT work for 15 years, if you include, I guess, the co-op during college years. So, I spent a lot of time doing a mix of things in the background, from networking to programming to database stuff and all kinds of everything in between. And I was always, I love games. So obviously I was also fascinated with the way they worked. And I loved, like building old maps and like the Duke Nukem 3D build editor and things like that. So naturally, it was just something I gravitated to. And then once we got to, I guess, like the PS2 era, I found it super fascinating just to look at those variations. And so, I was capturing my own shots and just comparing them. Sometimes I'd use them in forums, discussions, just, but it was really just kind of a fun hobby thing, if you will.
Yeah. And then basically in 2013, you ended up joining a Digital Foundry, right?
Yep, that's correct. That was just, we left the USA. My wife wanted to come back to Europe. She's from here. And so we followed her job. And so I quit what I was doing. And that's when I applied to work with DF.
Yeah, and basically you've been kind of like around the world, right? You lived in Japan and in France as well.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, exactly. It's been all over the place. So, and now here we are in Germany.
Yeah, and is there something that you've been kind of like used to in Germany? Is there something that you really appreciate right now? Or not right now, but I think especially since you've been living for kind of like a long time in Germany, is there like one thing or two things that you really say like, well, I really appreciate this part of this part when it comes to living in Germany?
They take care of people here, and it feels like there's actually a safety net, and also just I just like the culture. I like it's just it's a different place, and it would be there's so many things now I take for granted just in terms of like the service you receive and the things you have access to, uh, just in terms of everyday life, and it's kind of hard to imagine going back to the U.S. at this point, just because a lot of that stuff is lacking over there. So it's kind of a weird thing to get into, but it is. Whenever I go home, I'm just like, man, I actually prefer to be in Germany. And that's not even getting into things just like traveling around. Like it's so easy to go to so many amazing places, and living here, it's fairly central. You get cheap flights wherever you want. You can drive to a lot of different cool places. If it's just like, hey, I want to go to Paris, you can take a train, you can hop in a car, you want to go up anywhere else. Like it's easy. It's great. And it's something that I didn't get usually in the US.
Yeah, and also our internet service providers are always so reliable, right?
Well, okay. That's one thing Germany needs to work on. And
Yeah.
the US as well is mixed. And it's mixed everywhere, but France and Japan were much better for internet compared to Germany. Let me just say I've had some fun with Eins and Eins.
Yeah.
Not the most yeah.
Yeah. All right, that's another sponsor that I can never fall back on right now. So thanks for that.
Sorry about that, guys.
It's okay.
If they just gave me the service that I was hoping for, I would feel a lot better about things. But what can you do?
It's fine. Yeah, it's okay. So, and is there anything you miss about living in France or in Japan?
I mean, that's the thing is every place has things you like, right? Like whether it's just places to visit, good food to eat, shops that you get used to, like. There's all of that stuff is in all the different regions. So it's hard to think of anything super specific. But yeah, I just gotten used to living wherever. So it's, I can go back and visit sometimes if I want, I hope.
Okay.
At least France is easy to get to.
That's true.
We go down there often. Mm-hmm. Well, usually, except for now.
Yeah, well, right now traveling is very difficult, in fact. And like you said before, our interview said that you've been doing a lot of videos and a lot of things for Digital Foundry. So basically, with Digital Foundry having quite the large user base on YouTube, are things such as algorithms and average view duration have an effect on how you create content for the site?
Oh, that's an interesting one. See, I try not to. It's basically the only impact it has is if I do a topic that gets like really lousy views, it does tend to bum me out a lot, especially when it's something I put a lot of effort into. So that might keep me from putting, that specific type of thing out again. Or, like actually, this is a good example of, occasionally, it's nice to do a sponsored video. Because it lets you do the type of things that maybe wouldn't hit big otherwise. Like I did this documentary thing on the game Onrush, and I poured a ton of effort into that. And I went over there, filmed it. It was super interesting stuff, whether you cared about the game or not, honestly. And nobody watched it. So it was very low view count, and that really bummed me out. So the next time I did something like this was with the Surge 2, and we managed to do a sponsored deal, and I created it exactly the same as I always would. I mean, it was just my own thing. I did all the filming and interviews and capture and all that on my own, and this just meant that I could do it, and it would be like financially viable because, putting together something like that takes over a week, I'd say. It's about a week and a half of solid work, which means you're not putting out other videos in the meantime. So to be able to justify those big projects that I love doing, it can be a little bit tough because you got to commit time to it. But other than that, I guess the great thing is that I usually get to just kind of do what I like. Like we're really like given a lot of freedom to choose the type of content and the types of games and hardware that we really care about. And by doing that, it actually tends to make the content better anyway.
Mm-hmm.
If I had to cover stuff I didn't like, I mean, I can do it, but the passion isn't going to be there. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, totally.
It's just kind of like, then it just becomes this rote review thing. And I don't think there's that much value in trying to review everything or things that you don't really get into.
Mm-hmm.
And also, it's just I tend to pick topics for things that I like. So, I prefer to be positive as opposed to negative. But, if something comes out where I'm like, oh, here comes this game I'm looking forward to, and then it has like horrible problems, then I can feel kind of disappointed.
Mm-hmm.
And it's like, I feel like, okay, I better let people know what's going on here because this is disappointing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I actually really agree with that because while doing my research on you, I realized that you've always been very positive on almost everything basically, and you love celebrating all the older games as just as much as newer games. So, do you think it has been harder to maintain this positivity over the years?
I would say it's actually not that difficult. Just because, again, like I said, since I cover things I care about, it's like it's just this natural enthusiasm that comes out. And, the stuff that can be construed as bad news, it's more, I try to present it in a logical way. Like, I really don't like to just throw stuff out and slam it because I know what goes into the creation of this stuff to a degree, at least. And it's like, it's better to look at it from the lens of, okay, so what's going on here? Like, what is the problem when there is a problem? But, it's just like the internet at large is often a negative place.
Yeah.
And I kind of would rather celebrate the creation of games and the difficult work that goes into them as opposed to tear it down. Like, that's not interesting to me at all. So I think we have enough of that kind of thing out there anyway. And, some people like it. That's cool. It can be fun and funny to watch. It's just not the kind of thing I like to do.
Mm-hmm. And do you think the Digital Foundry fan base has been really appreciative of your, for example, 40-minute video of the Metal Gear Solid 2 a technical breakdown, or the 2-hour talk you had over the Sony conference?
Oh yeah, that thing. Yeah. It's actually most of the people that are like fans of the channel, I really like. Like, there's a lot of good people out there, and I hear from a lot of good people, and I wish I could answer like all the DMs that I get on Twitter sometimes, because there's a lot of really nice folks out there that are super passionate about this stuff, and I really like talking to them when I can. It's just I'm always slammed with so much work that it's hard to even find time to do that. But I try to stay connected to people because there's a lot of good folks out there, and it's awesome to talk to them. Usually the more troll-like comments that kind of roll out, that's just how it goes, right? Because you know how the console wars are.
Yeah.
As a veteran of them, I've seen it, and that's it never changes. You could say war never changes, and this is accurate here.
Yeah. Well,
it's just kind of fun now.
Yeah.
Usually it's fun. Sometimes it gets out of control, but it is entertaining to see what's going on there sometimes. And a lot of times it's people getting really excited, but
Mm-hmm. Well, a perfect segue, I would say, because console wars was actually one of the topics I wanted to talk about. For example, like with the new consoles on the horizon, do you feel that with every day being closer to the release dates and the release of the consoles, do you think that the console wars over the years has become more hostile, or are we now truly living in the peaceful days?
Oh, it's way more hostile. And I think that's just the nature of the internet being bigger than ever. You know what I mean? It's just there's more people online, and more people that just want to share their thoughts, and a lot of people get carried away. And I tend to think that they're younger folks that haven't yet figured that stuff out, or like they don't quite get it, and they're just, angry about things for some reason, or defending their purchase somehow, which, that's kind of how it's always been. It's changed. Because in the past, you go back to like the 8 and 16-bit days, Sega versus Nintendo, most of that stuff happened with people that you knew in real life, you know. You'd see the magazines and that was fun, but you'd be talking to people on the playground and you get into some heated arguments over that, and that's a very different thing than arguing about it on a forum, for instance, right? And you know, I've been through launches for so many systems now online there, and it has changed a lot. There's more people getting involved in it and more people like getting really like into it in a big way. And so we try to help people like understand it as best as possible. You know what I mean? Because it's like, it's better to provide useful info that people can like get excited about. But you know, it's tricky. It's a tricky balance.
Yeah. Yeah, and do you think like basically these console wars will always go on, or is there basically something like is there once a point in time where you just say
dude,
it's just everything is the same?
The thing is though, is this is not exclusive to games by any means. This is just how it is with so many hobbies and so many things that people are passionate about, right? Like that's just human nature, I think. Some people are more into that than others, and that's just how it's going to be. Like, so I don't think it's ever going to change because, you know, that's just the way people are.
And you just mentioned Sega and Nintendo. So basically, I know you're a big fan of Sonic Mania, right? And basically, do you kind of wish that sometimes Nintendo would go back also and do something like this with their games? Basically doing like another 2D sprite-based Mario game?
Yeah, sure, of course. I mean, but it's not just about just doing it. It's about doing it in a more ambitious way. You know what I mean? It's when you understand what has been created in the past and really deliver something special around it. That's why it won my game of the year that year, but it was Monster Boy and the Cursed Kingdom, which I felt was just a phenomenal game. And this is a game created in the mold of the old style, with, you know, obvious nods to it, but it made a lot of new changes and really pushed the design forward. And I would love to see Nintendo tackle something like that. I mean, they've done that before, but, you know, once they kind of moved to 3D, most of their 2D efforts never really got back to that. Like the new Super Mario Brothers series never really appealed to me. It's just something about it. It doesn't feel great. It doesn't look great. It doesn't, and it sounds terrible. At least in my opinion. I always hated the music in that game. But I don't know. I just don't know who would even do it right now. Like, because you kind of have an idea of what Nintendo's working on. You look at its teams. You know what's in the works, and I just don't know like who the heck would actually make something like that, because everybody's kind of busy. I guess I could say, you know, what was it? The guys, Retro Studios, did a great job with Donkey Kong Country Tropical Freeze back on Wii U and then on the Switch. I felt like that was a really nice kind of throwback. It's a different kind of game, really, but it's great and it feels like a classic thing. I really enjoyed that.
And speaking of like your background in tech and everything, so basically, do you sometimes feel that being so knowledgeable in tech areas and having an eye for the technical details is sometimes kind of a hindrance for you for enjoying games, or do you sometimes feel like I think nobody would have ever noticed this kind of frame pacing issue or something like this, but of course I notice it. Do you sometimes feel it's kind of a hindrance of enjoying games?
That's kind of funny. I mean, you know, obviously I think there's, you know, people that know way more than I do out there. You know, I know what I try to know what I can, and unfortunately, I am at least very sensitive to that type of stuff specifically. So yeah, that does actually impact my experience a lot, sometimes in a very negative way. It depends on what it is, but certain things I just don't. It just bothers me a lot. Like if you have like an uncapped frame rate, for instance, like it seems like such a simple thing, but having that instability in there, it drives me nuts. So it actually becomes hard to enjoy the game properly, because it always feels like there's something wrong. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And so that stuff can be hard to just ignore.
And besides basically the ability to have games locked at a 30 frames per second counter, basically, What feature would you wish the developers put more consideration into?
Well, I just think more than anything, whether it's 30, 60 or above, like it's a focus on stability, I think, is really important. And just I really appreciate the polish that can go into certain sort of, actually I'll say like the UI. Like the experience of using the UI itself is really important, I think, to making a game feel the best it can be, right? Like if you're pressing a button and menus pause and stutter and things, just navigating the menu doesn't feel great. Like just little things like that. That stuff adds up over time and it really detracts from the experience. So I feel like something, getting that right is really important. And games have gotten better at this. But I used to joke back in the day during the PS2 and Xbox and GameCube era that something I would call Xbox menus, because a lot of developers doing games on that system, for whatever reason, they would just throw like a low quality video clip behind a very sluggish, leggy menu. So you'd like be pressing buttons, everything feels delayed and kind of, it's not great. And it's just, it's kind of a fun shorthand for that type of thing. And it was more typical at the time of Western developed games in general, where there wasn't as much effort. I don't want to say effort. The UIs didn't feel as polished as they could. And it really stuck out to me. Whereas you go back and play a lot of these, I always go back to something like Ridge Racer 5, a launch game for PlayStation 2. You just look at like the way the UI functions, like the graphic design, the smooth transitions between everything. Like every single moment has had so much effort poured into it to ensure that experience is the best it can be. And just the simple act of navigating the menu feels great. It feels satisfying. And it sort of pulls you deeper into that world. And I really, really appreciate when that is the case.
And basically, speaking of these kinds of differences and these different focuses and focuses on attention, basically, do you think there's a sort of cultural difference in video game tech? Is there something that basically Japanese developers used to put less emphasis on, or still put less emphasis on, because they just say, well, it's not kind of a priority for us. They rather focus on performance instead of like outstanding graphics, or just an example.
Oh, I think things have changed a lot. It varies. I think things are becoming more unified. We're seeing a lot of developers learn from each other. There's more information than ever out there. So today we're in a really good spot in that regard. Back, I'd say like during the PS2 era was interesting because it felt like a lot of the streamlining that went on for performance reasons. They've made a lot of smart decisions to work around limitations. Like when I did that video on Metal Gear Solid 2, you might remember there's the part where you look at the cutscenes and you see like they might have these like partially built, mostly incomplete rooms where they could just cut the camera over here, show something, cut the camera over there, show something. And it felt very seamless to the player. But if you actually looked what they were rendering, behind the scenes, or the kind of stuff they had to have loaded into memory, it was very strategically done, very streamlined. Where a Western game, like something like KOTOR or something on the Xbox, they would always have the whole thing loaded up every time, you're in there. There's just more resources being used at any one point because they're trying to create this more immersive thing rather than using more smoke and mirrors, I guess you could say. And that had an impact on performance. So like the games could technically be more ambitious in some ways, but what you saw on the end user side was maybe less so. And there was more focus on the West about making bigger worlds that were more complex, even if it meant that, you had less memory for things like smooth animation and the frame rate often suffered. Whereas in, a lot of Japanese games, they were clearly designed around these strict limitations, like the survival horror games like Silent Hill, amazing looking games on PS2 especially. But every single room is divided up into these little tiny chunks. You know what I mean? Like there's loading between every single room.
Yeah.
And that helps a lot with managing, what they can and cannot do at any one point. Where, like a Western horror game from that era might actually, well, we're just going to load the whole map at, when we boot into that map. and that would have its own, limitations as well. So I saw there was a very noticeable philosophy difference there between the East and West during that specific period, but a lot of that kind of has disappeared, I think, today.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and you just mentioned Silent Hill, and I put on a question regarding Silent Hill because, not technically Silent Hill, but it basically blossomed from the topic of Silent Hill and basically the HD collection. So I do remember that you have been kind of upset with certain reviews of the HD collection because it basically was a technically nightmare with this collection. And let's say you become the head of a big gaming website and basically are responsible for also how the reviews are conducted. Would you change actually how people write about the technical side of video games, or do you think it's basically what you guys do is way too detailed for a broad review of a game?
Oh man, that's tricky. I'm not sure I'd ever be in that position to decide that. I don't really like to mess with what, editing is one thing, but completely changing something to something that you see but the reviewer didn't. I don't know. I don't know how I feel about that. So I can't really say one way or the other. But I do think that's tricky. I mean, if you're looking for something in depth, like you want to go to like what we're doing and some other sites are doing as well. But I do think like a basic review, if there are technical issues, I think it's kind of important to note them to some degree.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
But the thing is that a lot of times people just don't notice, right? And not everybody is as sensitive to these things, and some people are decidedly not sensitive to them, and it may not impact their experience in the same way. So it's, that's just kind of how it is. So it's really difficult to say what you could do there. And if you were running, in charge of a website like that, you're not going to actually even have the time to play every single one of the games being reviewed, right? So you won't even necessarily know about these problems firsthand. So it would be really hard to be like, yeah, you need to change this because you probably don't have experience with it since you're busy with a million other things.
Yeah, true. Mm-hmm. And do you think in general people put way too much emphasis on graphics these days?
I mean, I think it's the same as it's always been, really. I mean, that's, everybody's always put focus on graphics, and I think that's cool, but, so yeah, that's... I don't like to phrase it as like, oh, we're only talking about graphics, or oh, we only talk about gameplay, because I think all of those things are very, very important. Like every aspect of a game needs to be analyzed. It's when you get that perfect marriage of visuals, audio, controls, gameplay, compelling, whatever it is. This type of stuff, like when you nail every one of these aspects, that's when you have something truly wonderful. If you miss on those things, then you have something perhaps less wonderful. And there are definitely games that excel in one area or two areas, but then fall flat in other areas. And, you got to judge those accordingly. Graphics alone are not necessarily enough, but they can make for a fun tech demo on the side. But if you combine excellent, genre or technology defining visuals in a game while also delivering a truly outstanding game, that's the way to go. And that's super difficult to do, by the way.
Yeah. Yeah, because it's kind of hard to show the gameplay in a trailer form, right? Because everything basically the only thing you see are the incredible graphics.
Yeah, kind of. But it's not like the old days where it was you had to run commercials on TV and the like. People can look up on YouTube and see whatever the heck they want, as long as there is gameplay footage out there, and you can kind of make your own decision about it. So, I mean, that gets into the whole like reviews sort of discussion, like what even should be a review. Like, I don't really think there's much value in a review that just says like, well, here's the bullet list of features in the game and that kind of stuff. I think it's fun to hear people's opinions and sort of discussions about how the thing worked for them one way or another. I think that's just more interesting overall. Because, everybody's going to have different thoughts on that stuff. And I think it's fun to discuss, the game design from that perspective.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I really appreciate that you guys, and especially you, do these lengthy reviews and of basically your Game of the Year list, right? With, like games like Ace Combat or Monster Boy. Basically also putting the spotlight on like titles that not everyone considers game of the year material, because usually these days everybody's talking about the same games all the time. But with your lists, I always think like it's kind of like a mix between something appreciative of kind of the old way, and also something brand new with like everybody talks about it.
Yeah. Yeah, and again, that's not really intentional. That's just kind of like that's what appeals to me. Like I just talk about what appeals to me. That's really what it comes down to. And I have my own peculiar tastes, things that really speak to me, and that's the stuff I get excited about and want to talk about. So, and yeah, they can vary heavily. Like I have no problems going between all different console generations and modern and retro style design and just all sorts of different focuses. So
Yeah, I also like the way you talk about Dusk is also very appealing to me, just the same as way you talk about Ace Combat. And speaking of which, I actually bought just because of you, because I did the research and then I saw you talked in length about Ace Combat 7, and I just picked up a copy basically, and I'm currently waiting on it to be delivered to me.
oh man, I love that game is excellent. Provided you like arcade style flight sims, which is exactly what it is. But yeah, I absolutely loved it. Great experience.
Yeah, awesome. Yeah, can't wait to dig into. And basically, so regarding the technology knowledge of gamers, what is something that you wish people would have a better understanding of when it comes to video games and basically how they are created?
Oh man, I guess the big one, and again, I'm not the guy making this stuff, but the thing I always see is like when something isn't quite right or somebody has an issue with some element, whether it's a design issue, a technical issue, there's people are very quick to throw out all lazy developers. They love to say that. They love to get angry at this kind of stuff, but that really shows a lack of understanding of what goes into creating these things. I mean, more often than not, like people are very much aware of the shortcomings in the games that they've worked on. But often it just comes down to, time, budget, but especially time, like just fixing everything. Like games are so complicated these days. It's absolutely nuts. Like I just look at what people are doing and I'm just like floored that anything gets released. I can't imagine how difficult it is to bring it all together this way. So I have so much respect for those people. So to suggest that, something that somebody doesn't like or, is just a lazy thing, that always kind of bothered me a little bit, just, it's like, I guess that's actually kind of, I want to teach people this stuff as best as I can from my external point of view, try to help people appreciate what goes into creating this stuff.
Yeah. And basically, I think this is a good segue on a sort of topic and a sort of area on my questions. I just called behind the scenes, and of course, I don't want you to break any NDAs or anything. But maybe you can just give a little bit of a glimpse of what it was like, basically doing these kinds of these three things I'm just going to mention. So basically,
Okay.
first let's start off. You already mentioned it, but basically, what was it like to plan and get together with the development team of Deck 13 on your special on the Search? I know you did basically production and video and editing and film and writing, basically all by yourself. So kind of can you give a little bit behind the scenes of what it was like to do all these and basically how you felt during it, because you did it on basically the first time all by yourself, right?
Oh, definitely not the first time.
Oh, okay.
But, that's how. So I view that as a challenge and kind of a fun thing to do. Is like I do enjoy having sort of full creative control over this stuff. So it's kind of this high energy period where you need to come up with like sort of a flow for the whole video. Imagine in your head what this might look like. But obviously, before you visited the studio, you don't exactly know where it's going to go, perhaps. So the first thing was just, I pitched this as an idea because I knew that they were local in town, which made it easier for me in terms of actually getting the equipment to the site. Because if you have to travel, hop on a plane, and you need to bring all your camera gear with you, that is more challenging, I would say. It's less comfortable to travel when you need to take everything with you. So being able to shoot with a local company was super excellent here in Germany. So, I could just load my car up with the gear that I needed, the cameras, the sliders, tripods, lights, all that stuff. So that was great. Everybody there, super, super nice, very helpful. And I really appreciated just the openness that they offered. It was sort of a, well, what do you want to do kind of thing. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
It's like I had an idea of what they had, and I kind of gave my ideas of like, well, this is the kind of video I would like to make. So let's do it like this. And we kind of ran through during the whole day and just kind of knocked out my list of shots, basically, whether it was getting capture of the tools or, filming interviews or just filming around the office, like all that kind of stuff. It's really kind of fun because you're just moving around the whole office with your gear and just thinking, what could I film next?
Mm-hmm.
What do I want to film next? But you're also watching the clock a lot. So, I only have X amount of time. So by this time, I need to be done with this part so that I can get on to the next thing.
Mm-hmm.
So there's a lot of that. And that's, it requires, for me at least, a lot of concentration. So you have to juggle all this stuff in your head and ensure that you're hitting those timetables. Because if any one part takes too long, it's just going to take longer than it should, and you're going to run out of time, basically.
Mm-hmm.
So it's just a fun challenge of figuring out cool shots you can get, managing the time, kind of building the narrative in your head as to what you want to actually do with the content, and trying to let the guys that you're talking to basically tell an interesting story to the audience and give them some insight into what they actually have to do to make these games, or at least certain techniques that they might use. Like, let them explain in their own words, like, what's going on here, what it takes to reach that point. So that's the kind of thing I try to do. And it would actually be helpful to have another person or two with me, especially as like an actual cameraman, because setting up and moving the camera around and doing all that kind of stuff, it's a very demanding thing, that's for sure.
And basically, you said just like something like this, like having a second or having a cameraman actually is kind of helpful. So, is there actually something that you are experiencing on a daily basis when it comes to doing these technical videos that you kind of like wish people would know how much of a nightmare it is to do these? I know that you one of the banes of you is having the video settings menu that constantly sets the resolution to automatic at the moment the display type is changed. But maybe besides that, so besides that, is there something that you wish that people don't know how infuriating it is to do these recordings of this and that?
Oh, I don't want to say it's a nightmare or it's infuriating or anything.
Yeah,
that's not really true. Like if it was all that,
I was being a bit dramatic, maybe.
Yes. I mean, I guess it's just it's the amount of time it takes, I guess, that would be interesting. Like, I guess I should try to, maybe someday I need to do an actual behind the scenes video. I don't know if people would actually care to see that, but like the idea of just the actual process behind each video, it's very time consuming, because you have to capture all this stuff. Sometimes you have to film stuff, write your scripts, actually like do a lot of research. I do a lot of white paper reading and like watching GDC and other SIGGRAPH presentations and trying to reach out to developers to ask questions, pixel counting, running all the footage through the tools to get frame rate data where appropriate. If I'm on camera, I have to set up basically a temporary studio, get all the lights in place, get all the audio set up, all the capture gear, make sure all the batteries are charged, get everything positioned nicely, and then actually, put the script in the teleprompter and read through it. Each part of the process can take a while. So like if I just had like a 10 minutes of on-camera stuff in a video, that would take about an entire morning maybe to get everything going. And gameplay capture, depending on how much I get, it can take a decent amount of time. And I guess the only tricky thing is when dealing with 4K videos, that just makes the work less fun, because 4K video files take up so much more space.
Yeah.
So I have less actual like storage space with which to capture. So I like to capture a lot of the games that I play so that I have a lot of B-roll to play with, just because I really enjoy making cool cinematic shots or doing slow pans or photo mode stuff and just things to make the video look cool. to draw the eye to the details in the game in a fun way. Like I do enjoy kind of playing virtual cameraman within the games. I think that's a lot of fun. But that also takes a lot of time.
Yeah, I can imagine. And basically, yeah, everything you do is so impressive to me because I only do the voiceover basically for my intro in these podcasts, and I don't know, like it's only like a 5 sentence thing, but I constantly try to re-record it and just delete it again because I don't know, it just doesn't sound right or something. So doing like a 40-minute video on something like Death Stranding, just kind of like blows my mind basically.
I guess one trick that I do is I've actually gotten very good at reading through my scripts, at least, which helps a lot. But I quickly, whenever I make a mistake or fumble with the audio, I stop it, delete the mistake, and then just continue recording. That way you get a continuous like audio file at the end that sounds great. That's one way to improve that part of the production, because going through an audio file with a lot of flubs is no fun.
Yeah.
And you do have to do that if you're doing, like when we have the videos where it's say like Alex and I or Richard and I talking together, then obviously the flubs are going to be in there and you just have to work around them or delete them just to make it flow better. And also there's, when you're doing videos that are recorded with another person, there's the lag between the conversation, or if you're using Skype or Discord or something, there is a slight lag. So you kind of want to try to reduce that as well. So there's a lot of work put into audio on that side to make it sound fairly natural where it can.
And yeah, I also really enjoyed that your coverage of Xbox Series X and basically how you and Richard Ledbetter went to tackle and this kind of like put the console back together and kind of covering all the design. Yeah.
Oh, yeah,
So can you maybe, like I said, without breaking any NDAs, what was it like basically to prepare and go to Microsoft in Redmond and being actually one of the first people to actually get to see the console and basically get your hands on it?
I mean, it was both cool but also terrifying because we had to fly over there directly when the virus stuff was kicking up. So I wasn't too thrilled about hopping on a plane and going across the states from Europe during this time period. So that was very stressful for me in that regard. But I did enjoy what we saw there. And it was super cool to actually play with the hardware that they had on display there. And they were very open about just letting us, play around with the hardware, play around with some games on there, see whatever demos we wanted. It was pretty much just like they gave us some sort of like presentations on things about the system, which we could then report on, but then also gave us a ton of time to just say, okay, this is the things we want to look at. This is what we want to do. And kind of go around the area they had set up, check out whatever games, console, hardware, talk to people that we wanted, just to try to get as much information as we can. And that was pretty cool. So it was a fun experience.
And basically, can you talk a little bit about the preparation? Basically, did you just go and the whole crew sits together and says, well, we need to do this and this and this, and then we have to probably also, if we get a chance to get a close-up of this part or something, was there like something that you had like was there something that you discussed before what you wanted to do there?
Oh, I mean, Richard and I, of course, since we were the ones there, we had discussed some things that we wanted to get out of it, but a lot of it is winging it, Okay. It's like, oh, okay, here's what's here. I'll get out the camera and start filming this stuff. And it's like, oh, be sure to get that angle as well. That kind of stuff, it's very seat of the pants. And this is where actually having a dedicated camera person, even though I kind of played the cameraman for that trip, but having more people around helping with camera would be great. But what can you do? That's tricky.
That's true, yeah. And also maybe one for the final question in the topic of behind the scenes. Can you maybe break down of what it's like to tackle one of like some of the biggest games every year? For example, like you did a very big coverage of Red Dead Redemption 2 or Death Stranding. So basically, can you just like talk about what it is like to like schedule everything? Basically, you sit down and say, well, we have something because we need a graphics comparison on base console, Xbox One X, and Xbox One X, I think. Yeah, well, Xbox One X and PlayStation 4, PlayStation 4 Pro. All these different console versions. Then maybe even the PC version. Then also we need to check about what the graphics look like. So basically, how does it look like when you prepare for these things?
Oh, it's very time consuming. It can be really stressful for me. because, you know, a lot of people are excited about the game. Depending on how much info you have and what you have to discover, when you sit down with one of these games, it's kind of starting with a blank slate. So you're immediately you're playing the game, but you're also trying to think about like, okay, what do I want to talk about in this video? So I don't always know when I start these videos, right? Of course, there's the basic stuff like you got to do some frame rate tests, and you're gonna have to figure out the resolution as best as you can, which is, you know, that's just kind of part of the process, but that's not the story. At least it's not that interesting by itself, I think, anymore. And I don't want to just talk about that usually. So it's more, I just try to look into what impresses me in the game and come up with sort of a game plan to talk about that as best as I can. And that just means scrambling for days, capturing tons of footage, doing what I can to come up with an interesting video that is enjoyable to watch, basically, for people that are interested in the game, to give you an idea of what it, you know, how it runs, how it looks, that kind of stuff.
And is it basically just one person on one game, or do you sometimes get help from all the other people at Digital Foundry?
I mean, it's usually one person, one game. If there's two people voicing over, it's usually one person's the editor and the other person just joined for the conversation. But it's the case where when you hear one of whoever is doing the voiceover on the video is the one that made the video, right? So if it's me, if it's Alex, if Richard or Tom or whatever, you know, whoever is talking is the guy that actually did all the capture, all the filming, all the editing, all the writing. You know, we all do our own stuff, basically. So and that can take time. And I guess for big games, it really, you know, they're important. People are interested, and those are often very exciting. But how stressful they are kind of depends on when you actually get the game. Because obviously, you know, you get review codes before a game comes out. But when you get it is not always known. And sometimes it's right down to the wire. And it's a little bit rough. It's like, oh, you can talk about it on Monday, and, well, here's the game on Friday afternoon. You're like, well, there goes my weekend.
Yeah.
So, and you're just, you know, you're editing and crunching on stuff for very long days. Thankfully, it doesn't happen too much, but it can be a little bit annoying when it does. But, hey, you know, what can you do? It is what it is.
And basically, have you ever been caught off guard, basically doing like an entire video on, let's say, just, you know, Rayman Legends, for example, and basically you've been playing it on the weekends and everything, doing all the graphic comparison, and then there's a big day one patch, and basically everything is changed. Not everything, but I mean a big chunk is changed. Now the frame rate is more stable. Now the graphics are improved. The things you noted before are now kind of like all in place. Has this ever happened to you?
Oh man, I can't think of any good examples right now, but that has absolutely happened. And that that one is always that's just when you throw up your hands in the air and you're just like, well,
yeah,
because it's, you know, there's at least been a couple situations I can recall where I did a whole bunch of work, you know, videos about done, and it's like, okay, I'm about to export, and then publisher is like, well, here's the new patch. It fixes most of the problems in the video, and I'm just like, on one hand, that's great.
Yeah.
But on the other hand, that means a whole lot more work. So it doesn't actually happen that often, thankfully. But
okay, great.
when it does happen, it's I recognize that it's better overall because it solves an issue, but it's also just means, you know, it's more time consuming. So it's a funny situation when it happens, and we're all, you know, and it absolutely can happen. And that's something you always have to keep an eye on, you know, keep an eye out for patches and know that things are subject to change.
Yeah, that's true. But yeah, I can only imagine that when you're just pressing everything, like pressing the publish button basically, and just like 5 minutes later the patch goes live, and you're just like, well, that's now I'm officially a liar, you know.
Oh, I mean, if we publish the video before the patch goes out, then it's just, you know, we just try to put either some sort of note or a description or like an edit in the article or a tweet, you know, just something to say like, oh, okay, they just updated this thing, we'll look into it, you know. That's kind of the best that can be done in that situation.
Yeah, and basically you have to start over, right? Not entirely, but I think you just have to check now the things that you pointed out in your older video and recheck them again with the patch now.
Yeah. I mean, when you're dealing with situations like that, then yes, that's what you got to do.
Okay, yeah. Okay, yeah, so I think I covered most of the areas and most of the questions already, but I do have a few single questions still left over. So basically, you in public, you speak very highly of your boss, Richard Ledbetter. So
Oh yeah, he's
basically,
the best.
yeah, so so maybe we continue on that. And so what was like one or two things that he kind of taught you over the years, over like almost like 7 years now at Digital Foundry?
He's really helped me kind of learn how to reach out to others, and just sort of start those conversations, talk to other developers, and feel confident about doing it. And also just learned a lot about, I guess, just presentation skills and writing, and especially that kind of stuff. And it's just super encouraging, really like a super kind, very interesting fellow to talk to, who really, really knows his stuff. Like it's kind of crazy how long he's been doing a lot of this different stuff. Obviously, different projects along the way, different magazines, different sites, all kinds of stuff. But I've, it's amazing to work with him. He's super good and really lets us sort of tap into what we like to do, find our own kind of creative voice, and trust us to do it. And that's the best you could ask for.
Mm-hmm. Well, putting up the confidence in yourself and also reaching out to developers. Maybe I should go to him and learn a thing or two about this.
Yeah, he's great at that.
Great. And maybe just one or two questions. So I know you're a big fan of LucasArts adventures, right?
Oh, heck yeah.
Yeah, so this is actually my personal favorite genre, but it's kind of run dry these days. Like the well is dry. Nobody's now doing these. Not a lot of people are doing these anymore. Basically, traditional point-and-click adventures. And I saw that you wrote about The Dig. That it's one of your like a hidden gem, right? So I haven't played it actually.
You've not played the. You've really not played The Dig.
No, not really, because I usually only play the comedic point-and-click adventures, and I'm not sure if it is a comedic one. Is it?
No.
One? Oh,
it is
okay.
Not. But that's a weird one, because for me it kind of came at a time where I hadn't really experienced storytelling quite like that before in a game, and something about the music, the visual style, the storytelling, like what happens in that game. When I first played it in the mid-90s, it absolutely floored me. It really was just like, wow, like I can't believe that you're able to tell a story like this in a game. Mm-hmm. Like it felt more like an actual like novel in video game form, as opposed to just what you would typically see from a game story at that time. And I was super engaged in it. And it's the world itself, I still kind of reflect back on in such a positive way. Like the atmosphere they built, it's incredible what they achieved with those beautiful painted backgrounds and the music, and it's such a memorable place to be. So just solving puzzles and walking around that world is really excellent. It has its flaws for sure, but I really think, for me personally, it's one of the best games that LucasArts ever made, just because of that. And I know it had a super troubled development. It changed hands so many times. So many things changed along the way. But I still think that what they produced in the end is super well done. And it's not something we've seen that often, I feel. Like adventure games quite like that are very uncommon.
Well, after such an endorsement, I have to check it out, right? So basically now...
I think, yeah, absolutely. Okay. Definitely. Again, it's not comedic at all. Okay. But also, that's another thing. LucasArts was always known for their excellent voice acting. Like once they started doing talkie versions of games, their voice acting, they just recruited amazing talent, and they were directed so well. And The Dig is absolutely that case. I think Robert Patrick's in that.
Oh, really?
Who was in Terminator 2.
Okay.
I think he's Commander Boston Lowe, actually. But then, but the whole cast does such a great job. They bring so much to that experience. And it basically deals with finding, this alien world, discovering basically the secret of life, and then starting to realize that, wait, maybe there's a downside to this. And the way it unfurls, the mystery behind it, and the atmosphere they build is really remarkable. So I do recommend checking it out.
Awesome, yeah. So I guess that's it for the interview. I only have basically one question left, and it's a very very important one. But before we go to it, basically, where can people check out your stuff, and where can people find you on Twitter or something?
Oh, on Twitter, I'm at Dark1X. And of course, you can find us over on YouTube at Digital Foundry and on Eurogamer.net, where we post article versions of our videos, usually. So that way, whether you want to read or watch, the option is yours.
Awesome, yeah, great, yeah. And also, you can find us at the show. I always say us, but it's only me. Basically, you can find me at on Twitter at Dorian Chow. That's DorianChou. And you can follow the show along at Yumi Industry, both on Instagram and on Twitter, where we always, where we always publish a great cover for every episode, where I hand paint them and
Wow.
do a lot of, those are very incredible. You should check them out. Those are very great. And for the final question, this is something I stumbled upon doing research on you. So, and I thought it was just such a beautiful question and such a very important one. Why does Death Stranding look like a PlayStation 2 game?
What?
I remember that you had this very a sort of a strange exchange between one fan who pointed out that Death Stranding looks like a PlayStation 2 game. And I was so confused by it, just like, because I recently finished Death Stranding and I was so stunned by the graphics, basically, just like just looking at it and the way they conducted the cutscenes and the scenery and how everything just blended together, just the way you said it, gameplay intertwined with graphics and smooth frame rate and everything. And then I saw the thread on Twitter where you just like somebody called you out and said like, well, look at the shadows, they look like PlayStation 2 shadows. And I'm just like, I don't know. I don't know if he remembers the PlayStation 2 quality of shadows the same way as I do.
People don't know what they're talking about, and that's just typical console war BS, where it's like, and it's the same on both sides, where you have people that say, oh, Death Stranding looks like crap, and they'll find like the few little nitpicks that you can aim at it and focus just on those. It's the same thing that happened with Gears 5 that drove me nuts, where it's a gorgeous looking game, but people that are not fans of Xbox were very angry that I thought it looked great. And of course they find the littlest things to nitpick and like, that kind of stuff is really dumb. It's really dumb. I do not enjoy when people act that way. It's bizarre. It's so bizarre. Yeah. Like, just try to enjoy everything, guys. Come on.
That's true. I think those are the best words to finish the show. Just enjoy everything and don't be hostile to each other. And let other people also have nice things. Some people have Death Stranding, some people have Gears 5. That's all fine for everyone.
And if you need help hooking up like 20 something active systems at once, come talk to me, because I do exactly that, and it does take some thought to actually have that many electronic devices all hooked up and active at once. But it's a fun project to figure out. So rather than just playing one console, just buy them all like I did.
That's true. All right, then. So see you in the next episode, and thanks for tuning in. Leave us a review on iTunes, on Spotify when it's possible. I don't know where it's possible. Just spread positivity all around the globe. Tweet at us, say nice things about us, and also keep in mind that it's just basically just games, and everybody can enjoy them, I would say. All right, everyone. Bye.
Tschüss.